Okay, so I'm going to tell you my definition of disruption over the next 20 minutes. Disruption, personal disruption, also known as change. Show of hands, how many of you here today believe that you can change? All of you, right? Any of you have a love-hate relationship with change? It's like, exactly, Rishi. It's like the boyfriend, the girlfriend you can't live with, you can't live without. I know I do. We know that change is necessary, even desirable. You all know probably better than most that change is inevitable. What can be hard is when it happens so fast it feels like it's happening to you, not for you, and that's scary. But it doesn't need to be that way. What I've learned, having been an analyst on Wall Street and co-founding an investment firm with Clayton Christensen at the Harvard Business School, is that the theory of disruption that we apply to products also applies to people. I've since spent the last 5 years researching and codifying a framework of personal disruption so that whether you're scaling an organization, building a team, or just trying to manage your own career, you've got a structure to do it. So you ready? Yes? Okay. Take a look at these 2 data points and etch them in your brain. 6 times, 20 times. 6 times higher, 20 times greater. The theory of disruption states this will happen when you pursue a disruptive course. Your odds of success will be 6 times higher, and your revenue opportunity 20 times greater. To be successful, you don't cope with disruption. You harness its power, its unpredictability to propel you forward. Not just your company, but to propel you forward, who you are and what you do. Now, what do I mean by disruption? Show of hands, how many of you, when you were in school, were sent to the headmaster's office? A lot of early disruptors. You were all these silly little things, and now, well, you're taking over the world. Like Toyota did to who? General Motors. Flipkart to Walmart. And Uber to cabs. Disruptive innovation, it follows a framework. The disruptor secures a foothold at the low end of the market. Think Toyota in the 60s. Initially, its products are inferior, its position is weak. General Motors could have crushed them like a cockroach, but they didn't. Market leaders rarely bother. It's just this silly little Corolla. It's just this silly little Flipkart. Let's go after bigger, faster, better, Cadillac. The bad news or the good, depending on your point of view, is that once a disruptor gains a foothold, it too is motivated by bigger, faster, better Lexus. And so it goes. Personal disruption is how you take all of these ideas and make them meaningful to you. So, how do you use this framework? How exactly do you disrupt yourself? How do you improve the odds by 6 times? And when is it right for you? One of the first steps in understanding disruption is to recognize that disruption itself, it's unpredictable. We like to flip a switch and boom, the light goes on. We like to do X knowing Y will happen. So I'm going to go back. So when you work hard for days, weeks, months, even years with little result, it is unsettling. At our Disruptive Innovation Fund, we use the S-curve to help us gauge how quickly an innovation would be adopted. It helped us make the unpredictable predictable. At the outset, you know that growth is slow. Once a tipping point is reached, or the knee of the curve, and the tipping point is typically 10 to 15% of a market, you enter hypergrowth. At 90% or saturation, the growth, it tapers off. As we were applying this framework for investing, I had this insight that we could also use it to understand people. Whenever you start a new company, when you start a new job, when you start a new role, when you start anything, it's an opportunity to disrupt. The S-curve math tells you that initially growth will be slow. You won't know what you're doing. It will feel like a slog. And this helps you avoid discouragement because you know it's supposed to be slow. And as you put in the days and weeks and months of effort, you'll accelerate into competence and engagement. And this is the exciting part of the curve where all your neurons are firing. It's the sweet spot. As you approach mastery, things will be easy, but because you're no longer learning, you get bored. What our research is telling us is that you can build an organization that can innovate. You can build an organization that can manage through change by optimizing your S-curves, by having at any given time 15% of your people at the low end of the curve, 70% of your people on the sweet spot, and 15% of your people at the high end of the curve. In fact, if you want to know if you're about to get disrupted, there's a very simple way to find out. Very simple. All you have to do is take the pulse of your workforce. If you have too many people at the high end of that curve, well, you're at risk. Why? Because your people are bored, and bored and complacent people don't innovate, they get disrupted. So what do? You take a look at broken asphalt. Stay with me. Asphalt can resist thousands of pounds of pressure. So why did it break? Well, at one point there was a tiny crack, and it rained and it snowed. Well, not here. But then the water froze and expanded, and it broke because asphalt can't handle internal pressure. We, all of us, are like asphalt. When change comes, we feel under siege. We do more of what we've been doing, hoping to resist what's pounding against us. But if we have the courage to do more of what we have not been doing, this is where our inability to handle internal pressure can actually work in our favor. Just a few small changes, like drops of water, permeate, expand, breaking our hold on the past. Just enough to create space for something new and better. Leo Tolstoy, he knew something about external pressure. He wrote War and Peace. He also knew about internal pressure, Anna Karenina. Here's what he had to say. Revolutions are an attempt to shatter the power of evil by violence. We think that by hammering upon the mass, we will be able to break it into fragments, but this only makes it more dense and impermeable. Disruptive movement must come from within. Let me say it again. Disruptive movement must come from within. So how do you disrupt yourself? Well, in our framework, we've identified 7 levers. And I'll go through them very quickly. The first is to take the right kinds of risks. 2 kinds of risk I'll mention. The first is competitive risk. Now, you ordinarily think of this in terms of products, but today we're talking about you, a person. So competitive risk looks like for you, big job, huge opportunity. You just have to figure out how to compare to the 10, 15 other people who want that job. You can compete and win. That's competitive risk. Now, the fact that you're sitting in this room would suggest that you are clearly very capable of taking on competitive risk. But if you want to win even more, you'll take on market risk. Market risk is you don't know if there's an opportunity. You don't know. But there's a problem you think you can solve. And given that a lot of the jobs that are going to exist in 15 years don't yet exist, they haven't yet been created, if you can create the market, create the opportunity, if you're willing to play where no one else is playing, well, guess who's going to get the job? take on market risk, the opportunity to make a mark, 6 times more likely to be yours. And then you walk through that door of market opportunity by playing to your distinctive strengths. Your distinctive strengths are things that you do well that other people don't, like the koala. Did you know that this cuddly little animal, it sleeps up to 20 hours a day? One could have serious doubts about its ability to survive, except that it eats something no other animal eats. What does it eat? Eucalyptus leaves, which are poisonous to everyone but the koala. So this is its distinctive strength. But here's the shocking truth about your strengths. You don't actually know what they are, and certainly don't always use them. So I'm going to give you one clue, just one clue tonight, because we only have time for one clue. What compliments do you dismiss? The frustration of genius is believing if it's easy for you, it must be easy for everyone else. So the next time you get a compliment, instead of thinking, oh, that again, just kind of dismissing it, deflecting it, instead I want you to think, this is my genius. How do I use this? People tend to overvalue everything they are not. We had a conversation about that this morning. People talking about innovation in the United States versus India. Stop overvaluing what you are not. And we undervalue what we are. Which is why your superpowers may not be on your resume, because you overlooked or ignored them. Which is why you may hire people into the wrong seat, because they led with what they do well, not with what they do best. If you want to fly up the S-curve, bring your genius to work. Make sure the people who work for you bring their genius to work. And then play where no one else is playing. Eat where no one else is eating. Be the only eucalyptus eater in town. Number 3, embrace your constraints. And if you don't have enough constraints, and maybe you don't, then you need to create them, because you need that friction. You need friction to climb that curve. Look, you've got to have friction to go up that curve. So, to help you think through that, take a look at the film Jaws. Did you know that some of the most famous scenes in this film came about because the mechanical shark that Steven Spielberg wanted to use, it didn't work. So now he's over budget, out of money, behind schedule, late. So he finally has to shoot the scenes from the shark's point of view and let the music, and you can all sing it in your head, I'm sure, and our imagination do the rest. When resources are at a minimum, we get scrappy. We get scrappy, and in that scrappiness, we tap into our distinctive strengths. And because the doors that we all want to walk through are closed, we build our own door. For disruptors, constraints are not a check on absolute freedom. They are a tool of creation. Number 4, battle entitlement, that sneaky saboteur of innovation. There's a story told of a father who's putting his son to bed, and he's feeling tremendous love for his son, proud of the boy and man he's becoming. So as he tucks him into bed, he says, "Son, I'm so proud of you. Someday you're going to be a great dad." And the little boy looks up and he says, "Someday you're going to be a great dad too." The more successful we are, the more we think we deserve our success. So right at that very moment on the curve, when we have all the cognitive and intellectual and emotional and financial bandwidth to question what we're doing, to disrupt ourselves, instead we say, this is the way things will and should always be. One aspect of battling entitlement is a willingness to step back, in order to grow. You crouch before you jump. You bring oars back to glide forward. You bring your fist back to punch. Personal disruption involves moving sideways. It involves moving back, sometimes even down. And whether you jump or are pushed, it's an opportunity to grow. You step back from your entitlement. You step back from work to rest. You step back to think about the big picture. You step back in your career. This step back is your slingshot. What's your slingshot? It might be failure. Whenever we start something new, there is a fantasy of the simple linear world. You'll work hard and your dreams will come true. But that's not always the case, is it? My moments of humiliation include bombing a speech, being fired, and backing a business that imploded. The speech, they didn't like it, they hated it. I have all the comment cards to prove it. When I was fired, absolutely devastated, I thought I would never recover. And the business that blew up, how could I claim to be who I said I was? I'm not a savvy investor, I'm a fraud. When failure happens, we're embarrassed, but we're also heartbroken. You'd envisioned a future in which you would achieve a goal, perhaps even be hailed the conquering hero, and then you didn't, and you weren't. It's important to grieve. It's critical to grieve. But what's after grief? Well, you have to ditch the shame. Because if you buy into the shame, you allow the failure to become a referendum on you, on your identity, on your sense of self. It's shame that limits disruption, not failure. I'm going to say that again. Shame limits disruption, not failure. Whether you see an experience as a failure or success, it's a choice. It's always your choice. The up and the down are part of personal disruption. Failure is a constraint, a tool of creation. So give failure its due, but choose success. Number 7, be driven by discovery. As a disruptor, you are in search of a yet-to-be defined market. You have a purpose, but how you'll get there, it's yet to be determined. This probably means that you're going to end up in a place you hadn't expected, and you will not be alone. 70% of all successful new businesses, they end up in a different place too. We choose this unknown. We play where no one else is playing because we're driven by discovery. This is the framework of personal disruption. You take the right risks. You play to your distinctive strengths. You embrace constraints. Battle entitlement. Step back to grow. Give failure its due. And at the top of the curve, the bottom of the curve, and everywhere in between, be driven by discovery. Now, one final comment. One of the things that no one tells you, the textbooks on disruption, they just don't tell you. Disruption, it is by definition scary and lonely. When you leave your comfortable perch of doing things the way you've always done, there's a loss of identity, a moment of free fall. The PE, the puke to excitement ratio, is so uncomfortably high you feel like you're on a thrill ride to zero. It doesn't mean you shouldn't disrupt. It just means if you're scared and you're lonely, you are on the right path. If you are scared and if you are lonely, you are on the right path. In fact, if you have a feeling in the deepest part of yourself that you need to try something new, if you have a feeling that you need to let the people who work for you try something new, if you have a feeling that you need to let that water into the asphalt and you don't, you'll die inside just a little. That's why it's a dilemma. Because whether you innovate or not, there's risk. Whether you jump or not, there's risk. So what's your disruptive path? Why do you disrupt? When you disrupt, you hunger for a better life. When you disrupt, you become a problem solver, letting nothing stand in your way. When you disrupt, your odds of success are 6 times higher, your revenue opportunity 20 times greater. We give a lot of airtime to building and buying disruptive companies, and we should. But innovation ultimately begins on the inside. If you want to be an agent of disruption, first, become its subject. You start at the low end of the curve, you shift into gear to scale, and when you're learning peaks, you do what all great disruptors do. You walk straight into the innovator's dilemma and leap to a new curve. Because it's not the companies that disrupt, it's the people who do. Do I dare? Do I dare? Do I dare disturb the universe? Do you? Thank you.